Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, riding through the sports country with plenty of destinations to visit as I conclude a crazy week with whatever's happening throughout the landscape, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this morning, or even Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And I'll get to why this morning right now as I take care of some housekeeping notes. If you're looking for the NFL throughout this podcast, you've come to the wrong place. You have to go back to the previous one, which I just released this morning, a complete analysis, breakdown of the upcoming 2024 NFL season. Obviously, top storylines, the divisional breakdowns that I'll get full in-depth on, as well as my over-under win totals, my knockout pool pick for the week, surprises, disappointments, my Super Bowl prediction, as well as a preview of my beloved Pittsburgh Steelers. Yes, all that and then some. So if you just go back to the previous selection, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, the channel on YouTube at JAYREELZ, you'll get the in-depth analysis on all that's going to take place starting tonight in the National Football League, where we have Baltimore and Kansas City opening up the curtain on this campaign. So we have that on the latest edition, which was, again, released this morning. So definitely go back to that if you want to get your fix on the National Football League. Also, I got to shout out my brother Justin. Today, he is now Jesse Orozco, Tom Glavine, Mel Blount, the old Islander Rich Pilon, as he turns 47 years of age. So my brother Justin, for those who follow me on YouTube, all you have to do is just go to the second vlog, part 2, Escape to Florida, where he's a part of that, just so you get an idea of who I'm referring to. But to my brother Justin, brother from the same mother, love you, bro. Enjoy your day. May you have many, many more down the line, as well as OLIPOP. No, it's not a birthday for them, but you don't have to big up OLIPOP, the soda brand that is healthy and good for your gut with prebiotics, non-GMO, no artificial ingredients, 4 grams of sugar per serving, which is 1 teaspoon. So think about that. The normal soda that you drink from the brands that you've grown up with, they have anywhere between 39 to 40 grams of sugar per can, which means that is 9 teaspoons of sugar. Do you really want to have that in your body? So go to drinkolipop.com, that's OLIPOP, and you'll get 15% off of your order by using the promo code JAYREELZ at checkout. They have plenty of flavors. They have an assorted pack, so if you don't want to stick to one flavor, you want to try a few in one shot, you can even do that. And buy a case, buy a couple, buy a dozen for your family, friends, foes, or even frenemies for that matter. So drinkolipop.com. And also come Monday for sure. I know I mentioned this on the podcast this past Monday, where there will be a new partner on top of OLIPOP for the podcast. I can reveal a little bit of it today, but I have to go by the script literally and figuratively. So come Monday, you will know who the latest podcast partner is, as I'm looking forward to introducing them to you all, and it's a big one. So you'll stay tuned for that. Now, as far as what's going on in sports, we're now 3.5 weeks away from the conclusion of the baseball season. And it's interesting because I talked about this just a few podcasts ago, heading into the month of September, how I thought this would be maybe a barren wasteland when you got to September 15th. And when you think about it, you have 2, count them, playoff chases left in Major League Baseball. And that's the AL East and the National League wild card, more so the bottom of the wild card picture. And with that, it involves the 2 New York teams. I'll start off with the AL East, considering it's for division, and that is the Yankees. And the Yankees, for whatever the reason, have not fared well here over the course of the last week and a half, as they've lost now 3 series in a row, losing series to the Nationals, to the Cardinals, and then now to the Rangers. Teams that are out of the playoff picture, teams that you could say goodbye to, whether it was teams that haven't been such as the Nationals or even a team like the Cardinals who think they may be hanging around and are still mathematically alive. Same for the Rangers for that matter. But for the Yankees, things are starting to fall apart and at the wrong time. Whether it's the bullpen and a one Clay Holmes, as he's not only blown 2, 5, 10, he's blown 11 games as far as trying to save the Yankees from winning these games. And for the Yankee fan, I know they're pulling their hair out of their heads and there are no answers to be found. Mariano Rivera, there's been people even on social media saying, hey, can you still come back for the remainder of the season? And I wouldn't doubt that even he would still be effective at what, 52, 53, 54 years of age? But we can forget about that. But the bullpen is right now flaming out left and right, especially with the closer position. Then you have a scenario where Garrett Cole had to leave the game the other day due to an injury, and who knows what his status is. We remember that he missed the first 2.5 months of the season with that elbow that a lot of people feared could have been headed towards Tommy John, but that's not the case. He left the game the other day. Let me pull that up here. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. Obviously, with all the NFL stuff and a lot of the college football and everything that is gearing up for this coming weekend, I've been zeroing in on that. But for Cole, who had to leave the game, and as I pull this up here, Cole, who, as we all know, reigning Cy Young Award winner, a guy that the Yankees are going to need big time as you get into October, did leave with a right calf injury. A lot of people think it's going to be a cramp, which it probably will be. I don't know if he's going to miss his next start, which would be, I would think, if not Sunday, Monday into next week, where the Royals will come to town. But the Yankees, right now, things are starting to fray here. And even Aaron Judge, who has not hit a home run, I believe, in 9 games. So he's cooled off a little bit. He has been productive, but not from the power number standpoint. And with this Yankee ball club, as they're just trying to get to the finish line, they've had an opportunity to see if they could get closer. Granted, it's only the slimmest of margins, a half game behind the Orioles, but the Orioles weren't able to get some separation last night as the White Sox snapped their 12-game losing streak in Baltimore. So just when you thought that the Orioles could probably get another game and have a game-and-a-half advantage in the division, that is not the case. So this is a race that's going to go down to the wire, neck and neck, in 3 weeks when both the Orioles and Yankees will meet up at Yankee Stadium, which will be for the division, because you would think that the way this lead is going, it's either been a half game or a game-and-a-half tops. And I could see that being the case heading into that final week. By then, I'm sure there won't be any half-game differences because a lot of these series, whether it's a 4-game series and the Orioles do have a game in hand, I believe. Let me double-check that before I get too far ahead of myself. Actually, the Yankees have a game in hand. They're 80-60. The Orioles are 81-60. So the Yankees do have a 4-game series with the Red Sox next week. So it won't be until the week after that series to where the Orioles will have an opportunity to square off against the Yanks for the AL East. And as we know, pretty much throughout the whole summer, this is how this race has been. So for those out there who are wondering, the team that wins the division will, in all likelihood, have that bye because the Astros, although they've hit a little bit of a skid here, they've lost their last 2 games, but they're going to be fine for the division. But right now, they're currently 4.5. In actuality, they're 5.5 behind the Orioles. And they're, or I should say 5 games behind the Orioles and 4 games behind the Yankees. Or really 4.5 as I'm doing my math on the fly. So the Yankees, you would think they're going to be fine, but they would want to get that division only because they'll have the week off. They could set up their pitching, and they won't have to worry about having to go thrust into a wild card, even though they may face the Twins. And we know how the Yankees fare against the Twins, especially come postseason time. They just smack them around the ballpark, and I would expect to see the same considering that they would have the home field and they do not have to go on the road, so the Twins would have to face a daunting task to try to win 2 out of 3 in Yankee Stadium, which I do not see happening. But the Yankees right now, they are floundering. And now they'll have a day off before going to Wrigley this weekend, and the Cubs are trying to hang on to whatever playoff hopes that they have. And they're coming off a bad series, despite the fact that they had a combined no-hitter yesterday with Shota Imanaga, or however you pronounce his name, who pitched 7 innings of no-hit ball, and then the bullpen cleaned it up as they salvaged the final game against the Pirates, where they blew a brutal game on Monday. And this was on the heels of a 6-game winning streak. There were 2 back behind the Mets, 3 behind the Braves. And as of right this second, in which I'll get to the second race that's going on, but the Cubs, they may be a team that, with this upcoming series with the Yankees and knowing that the Yankees need these games, they are right now hanging on for their baseball lives as they're 4.5 behind the Braves at this very moment. So Yankees-Cubs has some intrigue. Of course, the 2 old venerable ball clubs in that old ballpark, which I'm sure a lot of the baseball purists and historians like myself will look forward to. But of course, I'll be on top of it regardless, because obviously with the Yankees and where they're at, and knowing that they have to start winning some series and not try to fall behind, not that they're going to fall that much further behind the Orioles, considering how they've been neck and neck here throughout the last month and really throughout the whole summer. But that's a series that, when we look at the baseball landscape as far as the schedule this weekend, that's a series that a lot of people will pay attention to. But the Yankees, let's see. Aaron Boone, we know that he's a guy that is going to be an apologist for his team. He's always going to have the pom-poms out. He's not going to call any players out or put them to task, other than Gleyber Torres at one time when he didn't run out, which would have been a double, and he thought it was a home run. And even then, he still had to wait a half inning before he pulled him from the game. So you know Boone is going to coddle his teammates or his players, and they're just going to go to battle for the manager no matter what. So let's see what buttons he's going to push down the stretch. They're going to make it to the postseason, but it's just a matter of whether they're going to be a wild card team and have to play that opening week and have their rotation probably in disarray heading deeper into the postseason if they get past the opening round, or do they win a division, especially when it comes to that final week against the Orioles. And remember, the Orioles right now have a 6-4 season series lead, so the Orioles just need to win 1 game. If they win 1 game and come game 162, they end up in a flat-footed tie, the Orioles will win the division just based on that tiebreaker. So just keep that in the back of your memory. And as far as the other race that's going on, it's the National League wild card at the bottom, that 6th seed, where the Braves and Mets, they're going at it, fighting it out tooth and nail, where the Mets continue their winning ways. They sweep the Red Sox out of Citi Field with a day off today, and they'll have the Reds come in for a weekend series, which should bode well. And if you're a Met fan like myself, I'm tempering this whole thing. And what I mean by this whole thing, this whole playoff chase, this winning streak, etc. Because just like I said on Monday, I don't want to be pessimistic. I don't want to be that jaded, cynical Met fan that, oh, the other shoe's going to drop. And let's just say, the same time that the Orioles are going to play the Yankees in that next to last series of the year, the Mets are going to go to Hotlanta to do the same. And I talked about this on Monday. I'm not going to rehash and regurgitate anything and everything that I said on the podcast a few days ago. But if it just so happens to be that the Mets are within striking distance, and to me, striking distance is more 1 game back than 2 games back. Because if they're 2 games back, they have to sweep. And chances are the Mets are not going to sweep in Atlanta. So if they're able to win 2 out of 3, at least they could get out of Atlanta in a flat-footed tie. So you want to be 1 game back going into that series, and let's see if it does happen to fall that way. We know that the schedule's tricky. All right, they have the Reds this weekend, fine. The Braves will conclude their series with Colorado, and Colorado's done nothing to help the Mets out as far as trying to get them even with the final spot in the National League wild card. So with the Mets having a day off, they're going to look to see whether or not the Rockies could do the Mets a favor. And if they do so, they'll be tied because they're still a half game back. They'll be tied going into the weekend where the Blue Jays will go to Atlanta for 3 days starting tomorrow. And like I mentioned, Mets and Reds this weekend. And then going into next week, although we'll meet up on Monday, but the Blue Jays will then fly back to Toronto, to where the Mets will go north of the border to play the Blue Jays for 3 days to start off the week. And then from there, they'll go to Philadelphia. And as far as the Braves go, after their series against the Rockies today, of course, and then the Blue Jays, they will, I think, be at home. Let me just double check that. They will actually have a makeup game against Cincinnati at home before going to Washington for 2 days. But now here's where it's going to be interesting if you're a Met fan. the following weekend, so starting a week from tomorrow, the Dodgers go to Atlanta for 4 games. It's a wraparound series Friday to Monday. And that could be huge because that is a series, and granted, toward the end of the year, they have to play not only the Mets, but also the Royals to wrap up their season. But those 4 games in Atlanta starting next Friday are going to be enormous because every Met fan is going to zero in to see how the Dodgers are going to help out the Mets' fate, quite possibly, when it comes to getting that final playoff spot. And I'm just taking this one day at a time. I understand I'm looking forward to what could possibly happen in Atlanta, and there are plenty of games between now and then. And yes, the Met fan knows the history between the Mets and Braves, as I highlighted on Monday's podcast. But right now, they're playing well. They're playing well above their heads. They're now 12 games over 500. And remember, this team was what? 25 and 36 at one point? There were 11 games under 500. I believe it was May 30th. And since then, they've had the best record in baseball. What does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Absolute zero, especially if they don't make it to the playoffs. But it just goes to show the turnaround that they had. And think about this. If you want to have, hopefully, the baseball gods on our side, when you look at the 2019 Washington Nationals, who were 19 and 31, and you know what happened to them, and teams that have had to come back from those big deficits, that had to make it into the postseason pretty much by the hairs of their chinny chin chin, and then go on a run. Could this Met team do that? You think I'm going to talk about that right now or even answer that question? Absolutely not. But if you want to think about teams that have had deficits or teams that have had so many games under 500, and in the case of the Nationals, they were 12 under, the Mets were 11, who knows? Anything could happen one game and one day at a time. So the Mets could exhale a little bit. I'm sure the Met fan wants to have a game today just to continue this. Good luck, but hey, maybe it's good for them to have this day off. They're going to be at home, and then we'll see what happens over the weekend and come Monday when we revisit. As far as anything else that's happening with the sport, with the pennant chases and division races, wild card, there's nothing else to speak of. That's why I started off this theme with Major League Baseball regarding those 2 races, because other than that, you got zilch. We know what's happening in the AL Central, where the Guardians, we would think, would be home free, and they beat the Royals 2 out of 3, which will pretty much put them out for a division race, where the Royals, think about this, a week ago yesterday, they were this close from overtaking the Guardians, and now it is quite the opposite. So the Guardians, you think, will be home free when it's all said and done, as they currently have a 4-game lead over the Twins, 5 in the loss. And let me see, I think the Guardians do not play the Twins throughout the rest of this season. I'm pulling up their schedule right now. I take that back. And I did say this the other day, so shame on me. They will host the Twins for 4 games, Monday the 16th through the 19th. So if the Twins have any chance, if they are, let's say, 2 games back, you could say 3, but then they'll have to sweep the Guardians, and we don't expect that to happen. So they have to be at least 2 back, and then try to take 3 out of 4 where they could draw even, because I don't expect them to sweep them by any stretch. But that's what you have there between Minnesota and the Cleveland Guardians down the stretch of the season. And as we know, Cleveland and Kansas City, they're done for the year. So that's why I think Kansas City is out. Then you have the scenario in the AL West where the Astros, although they've lost 2 in a row, but they have a 6-game in the loss lead, but 5.5 over the Mariners. And when we look at the AL wildcard picture, even though the Royals have struggled, remember, they had a bad losing streak. They lost 7 in a row, including that 1 game that they lost in Cleveland where they could have overtaken them for first place. I'm sorry, that was actually in Kansas City. Then they got swept by the Astros over the weekend for 4 games. They lost the first 2 games at home to the Guardians before salvaging that series yesterday. So they snapped the 7-game losing streak, but actually did not lose any ground. In fact, they gained ground thanks to the Red Sox just stumbling, fumbling, and bumbling. Talk about them getting swept by the Mets. They are currently in a free fall, losing 5 in a row. And even though you have 3 teams that are tied, Detroit, Boston, Seattle, but they're all 5.5 games back and 5 in a loss of the Royals heading into action today. So I don't expect any significance of a leap, because think about it. With both of these teams, or really all 3 of these teams, having 22 games left, they're going to have to make up, in essence, 6 games over that time. Could it happen? Of course, anything can happen in baseball, but the likelihood of any one of those 3 teams catching Kansas City or even the Twins, because the Twins, they have the slightest of margins over the Royals as of right this second, where the Twins had 2 games in hand on Kansas City. They are 75-64. The Royals are 76-65. So we would think that the Twins, and who knows, that can flip-flop, but with the 2 games in hand, you would think that that's going to bode well for them down the course of this final 20-some-odd game stretch. But the AL wild card, to me, is kaput. As far as the National League goes, we know that the Phillies are going to be home free winning their division. We know the Brewers are home free to win their division. And we know that the Dodgers, granted that the Padres are 4.5 back and the Diamondbacks 5 back, but they are both 5 in the loss back. The Dodgers are going to be fine. So you have no division race to speak of there. And the wild card, it's going to be Atlanta and the Mets, because when you look at the other teams that are involved, if you want to throw them in, the Cubs, those 2 losses were brutal. If they would have won those 2 games, there would have been at least in a discussion. But right now, they're currently 4 back and 5 of the Mets and Braves for that final wild card spot. And then you have the Cardinals after that, 5.5, but I'm not even going to include them. So that's what you have with the NL wild card. So one more time, people. 2 races to speak of. We know which races are those, and you know, as we get past the weekend and a Monday, we'll recap what's going on, and let's see if those races will still be intact. We would think in the AL East, and maybe to an extent with the National League wild card, considering that the Mets are playing the Reds, and even if they lose a game here, and you know they're not going to run the table, as long as they win the series here, whether they'll be 1.5 back or still at a half game, or if the Braves trip up here, we'll see, and maybe even this afternoon, so they could draw even the Mets without having to play a game. That's what you have in Major League Baseball. And you have Fernando Tatis is back. I wanted to highlight that, as he's a player that we would think could be big come October. Tatis, we know, has been in and out of the lineup over the years, whether it's by injury, suspension. This year it's been mainly injury, so he gave them a boost last night with a walk-off win against the Tigers. So as far as Tatis goes, we'll get to see him up close and personal, we would think, down the stretch, and certainly once you get into October. That's what happened with the baseball. Let me put on my helmet and shoulder pads and go through some college football. And the schedule is really weak this upcoming weekend, or week 2. But before I even get to that, the Florida State Seminoles. What an atrocious job by them, considering that they lost their opening game in Dublin, which I talked about last week. And the coach, Mike Norvell, who would have thought that his team would be 0-2? This was a team, as we all know, last year was 12-0 going, we would have thought, into the college football playoff, but because their quarterback, Jordan Travis, was hurt with a broken leg and was not going to play in the bowl, or at least in the championship or the semifinal, and the committee did not select them. They selected Alabama, and everybody was up in arms. Oh, how could that happen? They were undefeated. Alabama has a loss. All right, so what? They won the SEC championship, but Florida State's deserving. We saw what happened as they got beaten in the back of the woodshed by Georgia, who probably and arguably could have been that 4th team to go in, but that wasn't the case. And now they start off the year in Dublin with a loss to Georgia Tech. And then, after sitting on that for 9 days, to where they had a home game in their building to prepare, etc. And what happens? Not only did they lose, but they had one of their former players who played in Tallahassee as a Seminole, and the one, Trayshawn Ward, who had 138 yards from scrimmage, including a touchdown. And for the Eagles to go in there and beat them 28-13 to where they weren't even competitive, that is just an utter embarrassment. Considering last year, and I understand you can't say, well, JAYREELZ, that was last year, this year, but you would think that there would have been some momentum. And all right, fine, you lose in Ireland in the opening game. Who knows? Jet lag, and I'm sure they had a couple of days to acclimate. Whatever it was, they took Georgia Tech lightly. You can come up with any excuse you want. But what is the excuse for what happened on Monday night? And for Bill O'Brien, yes, that Bill O'Brien, the former Texan coach, the former New England Patriot assistant, he skated circles around Norvell, and Norvell didn't have a clue. The quarterback there, the former Clemson and Oregon State quarterback, DJ Ugalele, whatever, however you pronounce his name, that was supposed to be the guy, was the heir apparent to Trevor Lawrence, and now he's on his 3rd school in pretty much 2 years, and he's done nothing. And the Seminoles are 0-2, just as bad of a start that you could possibly imagine. But here's the crazy thing. Now, granted, they have Miami, and Miami's gotten off to a good start with their win against Florida. But is there an outside possibility that if they do end up in a conference championship game and run the table from here on out, and that includes a matchup against Miami later on this year, can they somehow, some way sneak into the college football playoff? Well, if they win the ACC, that's their shot. Other than that, they are not going to be a part of this playoff because 2 losses will get you in to qualify for that 5 through 12 slot, or if they do win the conference, they'll end up being a 4 seed. But as bad and as just awful, however many Seminole fans that are out there, especially in this tri-state area where I live, but of course down in the state of Florida and wherever else they may be, hope is not lost. And yes, it looks bleak, and chances are you're probably not going to make it, but there is a slim to a long shot possibility of winning a conference. So that means you'd have to probably beat Miami twice, because you'd have to beat Miami in the regular season, and chances are Miami does have a successful regular season. I know Clemson lost the other day, and who knows if Clemson's going to make any noise. But stranger things have happened. You never know. But the only way Florida's going to make it is if they win the conference. So I don't think they're going to. And they still have, obviously, a whole schedule that's ahead of them. Granted that the ACC is not strong, but boy, that was just, I couldn't believe that game and was just completely shocked by the outcome. And let's see whether or not they're going to get back on the beam here. And I don't know who they play this week. Let me just pull that up as I turn to the schedule here. But for college football overall, it's a dead week. And that's usually the case when you have the opening week of the season. Obviously, you're going to have all those primetime games, all those big-time matchups as we saw. And for college football to now take a step back with the NFL now going to be front and center starting tonight, as we know, in Kansas City and then in Sao Paulo, which is a joke. And I guess I could get into that. I talked about that a little bit on the podcast for the 2024 NFL preview. But no, I will stay away from the NFL. As for the schedule, the big game is Texas at Michigan. And that's going to be an interesting test for Michigan. As we all know, the new coaching regime, quarterback, etc. What's going to happen there come high noon in the big house? Texas, to me, it's more about Texas than Michigan, because if Michigan does win the game, it's like, all right, well, they were at home. To me, this is more on the Longhorns winning this game and really making a statement in this early part of the college football season as a team ranked number 3 in the nation to really show up and show out, to know that they belong in the class of Georgia. They belong in the class of the Ohio States, the Oregons of the world. So for the Longhorns, let's see them go into the big house and try to not only steal, but really put a stamp on their school, on the college football landscape. And I think that would be a big-time win for them if they win 10-9 and they win in ugly fashion. Doesn't matter. You don't throw wins back, whether it's in college or in the pros. So that's one game early on that we're going to focus in on. Other than that, your 3:30 game, what? Iowa State? I mean, I'm not going to get crazy about that. I understand in-state rivalry, but And then your night game is Tennessee, NC State. What is this, college basketball? So you don't really have a big-time college football schedule this week. And let me see who Florida State is playing. I would think they won't have an early bye, no? Considering that, yes, they did play overseas, and then they just played Monday night. And for them to have a quick turnaround of 5 days, I get it, they're college kids. But I'll pull that up in a second before I pivot and turn to other things. Matter of fact, let me do this now. Florida State, as we know, schedule. And you know what? That's good, because then I'll even take a look to see who they're going to play here forthcoming. Seminoles football. So for them to have Memphis, and yeah, that'll be next week. So they do have a bye, considering that they did play Monday night, so they're not going to have a 5-day turnover. They'll have Memphis coming to their building, and then they'll have Cal also the following week. So they have some home cooking here over the next few weeks before they host Clemson on October the 5th, and that's obviously going to be a huge game if they have any shot to try to be a part of this college football playoff discussion. So that's what you have with the college football. Let me take off my helmet and shoulder pads, and I'm going to break out the tennis racket, because the U.S. Open is now coming to a conclusion. And the big theme going into this weekend and pretty much throughout the middle part of this week is what the American tennis player has done. And granted, understood that you don't have Carlos Alcaraz, you don't have Novak Djokovic, you don't have even Iga Świątek, who I'll get to in a second, and Coco Gauff. I'm sure she has to be kicking herself because she obviously is not part of this tournament and she is a U.S.-born player. But on the men's side, you have a matchup there tomorrow between Taylor Fritz and Frances Tiafoe. Now, those two guys will be guaranteed to have a spot in the final, which you haven't seen since 2005. And you haven't had a men's championship on the U.S. Open since Andy Roddick did it 21 years ago. So to have both Fritz and Tiafoe, and I'm sure there's a lot of Americans that wish that they would meet up in a final as opposed to a semifinal. But let's face it, even with the American players that are there, on the women's side, Jessica Pegula, good for her as she's had a great run throughout this tournament. And for Pegula, she beat the aforementioned Iga Świątek. Now, Świątek, all right, she got to a quarterfinal. And for her, who has, I don't want to say fallen on hard times, but has not played well here outside of the French Open. We saw what she did at Wimbledon, out in the first round. Here, she got some length, made it to a quarterfinal. She did win the U.S. Open a few years ago and was hoping to get back. That got swatted down by Pegula. And Pegula, who's ranked 6th in the world, and we know that she's a very good tennis player, but for whatever reason has not been able to get to that semifinal or final round, which has been dominated by either Świątek, Aryna Sabalenka, and the like. And for now Pegula to slay the beast of Świątek. And I understand she still has another mountain or two to climb, as Pegula will face in this next match against someone. Let me see. Let me just double check that. I was going to say she was going to face Emma Navarro, but I believe Navarro is going to face Sabalenka. And that is the case. So Sabalenka will face Emma Navarro in the semifinals to then see what's going to happen as far as the final goes. And the matchup that it will be for Pegula is going to be an interesting one, because that is going to be Karolina Muchova, who beat Jasmine Paolini, who was looking to get back to her 3rd straight final. Remember, she lost at the French and at Wimbledon and lost badly in those 2 matches. And she got beat by Muchova, who's going to now face Pegula. So let's see. That should be a hotly contested matchup. They'll face each other today, as the women's semifinal will take place later on. And then you'll have the final Saturday at 4 p.m. So with Pegula, American woman, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be rooting for her to get to a final and see if they can win. And the same for Tiafoe and Fritz. Now, the men's side, this is Jannik Sinner's tournament to lose. Sinner, knowing that he doesn't have to worry about Alcaraz or even Djokovic, Sinner has done well here throughout this tournament, and he beat Daniil Medvedev yesterday, and that was, I don't want to say a statement, but knowing that Medvedev had won a U.S. Open back in 2021 and was probably going to be his most staunch competition, but that is not going to be the case. And we would think, all right, who's going to play in the semis, considering the aforementioned hotshots are gone and long have left the tournament? Well, the only guy standing in front of Sinner and a final matchup against either Tiafoe or Fritz is a Brit by the name of Jack Draper. Who? What? Don Draper from the Mad Men series? No, not he. It's Jack Draper, and I have not seen him play. I don't know what his game is like. He is going in as a big-time underdog. So we'll have to see whether or not Sinner will either put him away in straight sets or maybe take him a little lightly to where he may have to sweat out a 4, or dare I even say a 5-set match. So Draper, he's going in with house money. Nobody thought he would get this far. Here he is in a semifinal setting. And let's see if he can upend Jannik Sinner, who came into this tournament, as we all know, with a lot of controversy over his head with the 2 failed drug tests because of the cream that was taken due to a massage, I guess, between the tournaments here leading up into the U.S. Open. So if Sinner does come out on top, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of whispers and rumblings about that. And for him to not be suspended, considering that you've had other players on the tour, more so on the women's side, who had to sit out due to steroids or due to violating policies, and that is Simona Halep, as we know. But for Sinner, let's see if he could get past Draper, who, like I said, is going in as a big-time underdog, and I would think some pressure on Sinner knowing that he has to beat him and handily to get to a final. But the tournament has been intriguing. Even without the heavyweights there that have been exited stage left on the men's and even the women's side in a one Coco Gauff. And even Swiatek, for that matter, who lost just yesterday. So we'll see. I know the tennis is going to get swallowed up by the NFL and even college football for that matter. And the one thing about the final, especially on the men's side, comes Sunday, which is usually 4 o'clock. And that, again, with the 4:25 window and Tom Brady. But why do they have the men's final starting at 2 p.m.? Does that make any sense if you're a tennis fan? Now, it depends. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool tennis fan and you live in New York and you're going to go out to the Open and you can just watch the games on your phone, that's one thing. But let's just say if Tiafoe does make it or Fritz does make it and there is some intrigue among the good sports fan that wants to know what's going to happen, and they're probably going to think, oh, it's at 4 o'clock, where at least you have a 25-minute window to watch the start of that match before you get to Cowboys and Browns, where Tom Brady will have his first ever game behind the mic as a color commentator. But for 2 o'clock, for the Tennis Association to have that start then, right in the middle of the 1 o'clock games on the opening Sunday of the NFL season, nobody's going to watch that. Nobody's going to care. Maybe if it pops up on their phone, or maybe if they think, oh, wait a minute, isn't that starting now? So tennis, and I get it, it's a niche sport. It's not among the major 4 sports in the nation, but I'll be on top of it. Yes, I'll be focused more on the NFL, but I'll have a roving eye on the tennis to see what's going to happen there. And the final tennis tournament of the year will soon come to a close. All right, now let me lace up my skates. That's right, my ice skates, because I want to talk a little hockey. There was a big contract that was signed here over the last 24 hours, which I didn't even talk about on my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, shameless plug. But before I get to that, think about this, people. It is now September the 5th. And again, happy birthday shout out to my brother Justin. 2 weeks from today, training camp's open. Didn't the Florida Panthers just win a Stanley Cup about 5 minutes ago? It seems that way, and that was at the end of June, if you recall, on that Monday night, the final Monday of June, I believe, or maybe that was the next to last. Was that June 30th? May have been, or if not, it doesn't matter. But training camp is going to open up 2 weeks from today. And with the season, I believe it's going to begin, what, October the 8th? So that Monday or Tuesday in October. Before you know it, it's going to be here, people, and you're going to have the NHL. Now, that's going to open up on the 8th here in the States. But you have a scenario where October 4th, you're going to have the Sabres and Devils play in Prague in Czechia, Czech Republic. They're going to open the season there with one of those, I guess, international series games, which we've seen over the years. And I get it, it's Sabres, Devils. Not many people are going to be crazy about it unless you're a dyed-in-the-wool Devil or Buffalo Sabre fan. I understand. But I bring that all up because hockey will soon be on the horizon and in our consciousness when it comes to another sport introduced to us here in the fall and the winter. And think about it, it is still summertime, and here I am talking about the NHL. But with that being said, the big contract that was signed was by an Edmonton Oiler. And that Edmonton Oiler player has an 8-year, $112 million paycheck. Obviously, he's not getting it all in one shot, but his annual average value is $14 million. $14 million? Wow. I can't believe that. And he's going to be tops in the sport. Well, it makes sense for Connor McDavid to have being the most paid player in the National Hockey League. He is not the guy. The one who signed that contract, again, topping Austin Matthews, he of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who currently is making $13.25 million. The player that is making $14 million a year that he inked on the dotted line, which actually takes into effect after next season, is a one Leon Draisaitl. And listen, Leon Draisaitl is no slouch. And yes, I get it that the last time you saw Leon Draisaitl, he barely had a handful of assists in a 7-game series to win a Stanley Cup and was a no-show in Game 7. And I get it that the same went for Connor McDavid, although McDavid had a bigger and better series than Draisaitl, and understandably and rightfully so, because he is arguably, although not the reigning MVP, but he is the sport's best player, McDavid that is. But Draisaitl is certainly amongst the top 10 players in all of the National Hockey League. But for him to get that money, for him to now break the bank, to have the biggest contract throughout the sport, where does that leave Connor McDavid, who will be a free agent in 2 years? Not after this upcoming year, 24-25. He'll be a free agent in 25-26, or after that season, where he will be 29 years of age, which is currently the age of Leon Draisaitl. But he will turn 30 next month at the end of October. So 8 years, he's going to play till he's 38. But what is McDavid going to get, considering that he's a 3-time MVP? He is the face of the NHL right now. And I get you could probably argue with a few other players. But if you're going to ask me, McDavid by far is the best player in the sport. And you could say Austin Matthews, you want to say Nikita Kucherov, you want to say Nathan McKinnon, maybe even to a lesser degree Cale Makar. You could say all that. But to me, it is number 97 dressed in orange and blue. What is he going to get? And not only that, but where are the Oilers going to have to maybe look under the sofa cushions or whatever, because the NHL has a hard salary cap. And if he's getting $14 million a year, you know that he's probably going to get minimum $14.5 to $15. Who knows what the length of the deal will be? He'll be 29, like I mentioned, and he'll turn 30 that January, or the January after he's due up to be a free agent. This is going to be an interesting scenario, because McDavid and Draisaitl are like the Gretzky and Curry of this team. And you know that the Oilers will be up in arms if they don't re-sign their generational player. So they still have 2 years to sit on it. They have plenty of time. I don't know their salary cap scenario as of right now. We know they have some big-time players. Well, their name is Zach Hyman, Evander Kane, who I believe signed a 2-year extension. But he's not making big-time money like that. And other players, Matthias Ekholm, I believe he's a free agent after next year. So there may be some flexibility for when the time comes for McDavid to probably blow away whomever is in their wake as far as being the highest paid player in the game, including his own teammate Draisaitl. But Draisaitl, he's deserving of it. And it's surprising that you don't see a lot of these contracts in that stratosphere. You see a lot of those 8-year contracts that are like $63 million or maybe even $72 million, where players getting $8 or $9 million a year. Not anywhere near $13 or $14 million. And if you're wondering how much McDavid is getting annual as a right to second, when he signed his deal, 6 years ago, 8 years at $100 million, he is averaging $12.5 million a year. So even though Draisaitl's averaging $1.5 million more, which still is significant. I mean, it's not as if McDavid's getting 9 and here is Draisaitl getting 14, but there is a bit of a gap there. And for McDavid, his day and time will come, no doubt. And if the Oilers even flirt with the idea of having McDavid go onto the market, shame on them. I don't think that'll be the case. I would think they would know better. But remember, granted the different regime, this isn't Peter Pocklington anymore and Glenn Sather, but this franchise traded Wayne Gretzky. And I'm not to say that history is going to repeat itself in 2 years, but you still have to keep that in mind. And I think at the end of the day, he's going to be an Oiler for life, no doubt. How could you not see Connor McDavid in any other uniform than an Edmonton Oiler? But keep this receipt for somewhere down the road, because quite possibly it could come to fruition. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode in the books. If you're wondering, hey, NFL, you didn't talk about that, not even a smidge, as I mentioned at the top, and not to repeat it, but you know where to get your NFL preview. But that'll do it. Another episode in the books. As always, people, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, one more time, subscribe, rate, review, like, leave a comment on YouTube at JAYREELZ, where you'll see that NFL preview. I had to throw that in there. Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com, and YouTube as well, as you well know. Throw me a few stars. Leave a generous and very complimentary few sentences. It'll go a long way into increasing the visibility of this podcast, as you know, as that was also said at the very top of this podcast. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. And, of course, go to Drink OLIPOP, D-R-I-N-K, like take a drink, OLIPOP, OLIPOP.com. Save 15% off your order. Healthy soda, better than the soda that you've grown up with that has that just terrible taste and the sugar, etc. Not OLIPOP. Save 15% off your order by using the promo code JAYREELZ at checkout. Buy a case, a couple, half dozen, a full dozen. Why not? Send them to your family, friends as early Christmas gifts. I would greatly appreciate that. Because whether you do or do not know, people, this is my passion. This is what I've built and born to do. Full-time content creator, bringing you nothing but that passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.